You know, it seems like forever ago that I made my first anti-Torah observant Christian video, which was entitled "The Fallacy of Being a Torah Observant Christian," and yet I still get many comments on it. One listener, watcher, was kind enough to send a link to a video that she thought I might be interested in, which is entitled "Clearing Up Covenant Confusion" by a man named Matthew Nolan. And I've never heard of Matthew Nolan before I was sent that link, and so I don't know anything. When I watched the video, I didn't know anything about it, and I think that's kind of the point. I did not go out of my way to find out anything about him. I wanted to hear what he said, and so he took 90 minutes. I spent 90 minutes of my time watching the video, and he made some good points. I mean, there does need to be a clearing of the air, a getting back to biblical interpretation in regards to the covenants. I mean, there's no doubt about that, because if there's a group of people on this planet who don't understand covenants, it is Torah observant Christians, because they just pick and choose, mix and match, and do whatever they want and call it Torah observancy when, well, as even just my first video illustrated just how wrong they were. But I was willing to give this guy a chance, and so I gave him a fair hearing. I sat down for 90 minutes and listened to him. And, just to distill it down and not waste a bunch of time on like a full-blown critique, I think that if I could distill down his teaching to one basic thing, the one basic thing that I object to, it's that he seeks to take Exodus 19, and I think that's right. Let me just fire up my Bible program here, from which I use the Strong's numbers, which he seems to have a certain amount of disdain for. But we go, and I just want to make sure I get this partitioning right. Yeah, so Israel gets to Mount Sinai in Exodus 19. And this is where the whole giving of the law begins, and so that's a good place to start, because everything before that is really not. I wouldn't consider that Torah. Some people would, and that's fine. It's not fine, but it's understandable. No, it's not even understandable. Until God spoke to Moses, there was no Torah. So let's get that out of the way first. So the old covenant cannot begin in any way, shape, or form before Exodus 19. And so his basic position is, and it's something that I've never heard before, is that everything that God told Moses from Exodus 19 through Exodus 24, verse 11, is what's called the Book of the Covenant. And he goes on to describe what a covenant is, which that's another thing I don't agree with, but I think we can save that for another video. So, because like I said, I just want to distill it down to this one point. So everything from Exodus 19:1 through 24:11 is what he refers to as the Book of the Covenant. And indeed, the Bible itself does refer to it as the Book of the Covenant. Then everything from Exodus 24:12 until Joshua, well, I don't know I can't remember what he said now. At the point in time when the Israelites were ready to enter the land and they reaffirmed the covenant. So whatever chapter that was, certainly by Joshua 5. So let's say that everything from Exodus 24:12 until Joshua 5, let's say, is what's called the Book of the Law. In other words, there's a clear disjunction between those two things, and his assertion is that the Book of the Covenant was a real covenant, but the Book of the Law was something that God simply imposed upon the Israelites, and it wasn't a covenant. And of course, then he gets into the whole set of reasoning where, and I'm sorry, I'm just trying to be fair, which is why it's taking me some time to because I do want to be fair in regards to what he said, so that I'm not misrepresenting him. But I think I'm being fair. But it's such a foreign way of thinking that I'm having, I need to I'm sorry. Just the hesitation and everything that's just because I'm trying to be fair. So the first, I'll just call it part one, is what counts, and part two doesn't count, and part two is what was done away with on the cross. And I think I think that is about as fair a representation as I can make. And I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, well, hold on, that just doesn't sound right to me. I mean, so what you're basically saying is that as part of God's covenant relationship with Israel, that the whole sacrificial system was just something that was imposed on Israel, and they never really agreed to do it, and so it wasn't really a covenant, according to his definition of what a covenant is. And I'm just, because, it was interesting. It was an interesting perspective. And so I'm like, does this really have any merit? Does this have any kind of validity? And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, Torah observant stuff, Torah observant stuff, Torah observant stuff. And yet he seems to be trying to skirt a line around what I've usually heard from Torah observant people, because he talks about, hey, you can't talk about the covenants without talking about what Paul said in Galatians and what the writer of Hebrews says in Hebrews. And so I'm like, okay, well, this guy must be pretty good because I tell you why, because usually if you talk to Torah observant people, the first thing they say is, oh, Paul's the Antichrist, and we're not even going to take what he says, because of course what he says totally disproves what they believe. But this guy is like, he's like working into the New Testament. And I'm like, okay, well, I have to take this seriously. I mean, if he says I'm taking Paul and the writer of Hebrews seriously, and I'm basing my conclusions about what they wrote, and then looking back at the Old Testament, and looking through the lens of what they wrote, I have to take it seriously. But still, this whole divvying up into part one and part two, the law of the covenant, or the book of the covenant, and the book of the law, or the law of Moses, or just the law, however he might refer to it. It bothered me, and I thought, no, this is not right. I don't see that. I mean, I can see it. I understand where it's coming from, but I don't see how it's valid, because wasn't the sacrificial system really important? I mean, I've read the New Testament. It is really important. It's important to understand that, because then we understand the importance of Jesus' sacrifice on our behalf. And so it's like, fortunately, as I was thinking about this morning, driving around, doing the Uber thing, I remembered my Hebrews, and I'm quite disappointed that Matthew has forgotten most of his Hebrews. So we look at Hebrews 9, chapter 9, verse 1. Now even the first covenant had regulations for worship and an earthly place of holiness, for a tent was prepared, etc., etc., etc. And you know what this does to his argument? It blows it all apart, because the writer of Hebrews says that the first covenant included all the things that were mentioned from Exodus 24:12 and onward, because, of course, the book of the law is all about the Levitical priesthood and everything that they had to do. And so therefore I don't have to go any further in my analysis of Matthew Nolan's theological position to know that it's completely and utter. Well, is it completely and utterly wrong? Yeah. It is, because if it's just a little bit wrong, then it's really wrong. It's kind of like when James said, if you break one law, you've broken the whole thing. Yeah. It's completely and utterly wrong, because here we have an inspired writer in the New Testament, really actually in the first verse. I only need one verse. Now, even the first covenant had regulations for worship and an earthly place for holiness. Neither of these things are mentioned in Exodus 19:1 through 24:11. Nothing. The fact that they did a blood sacrifice to ratify the covenant doesn't mean that they had regulations for worship and an earthly place of holiness. Only the supposed book of the law has these regulations contained in it, and the writer of Hebrews says that's part of the first covenant, the old covenant, the law, however you want to refer to it. And so it's just kind of sad that we've just got another person out there who it's like Torah observancy 2.0. It's like, well, we realize we can't just not. Right, and I think that's really what it is. It's like, well, we can't just deny the New Testament, or we can't just say we believe what Jesus said and say Paul's the Antichrist and Peter didn't know what he was talking about and John was an idiot when he wrote Revelation or whatever. That's what it is. So we're going to find a way to make some inroads into that whole scene, and we're going to be able to say that we are New Testament believers, but hold on. Everything from Exodus 19 through Exodus 24:11 is still valid. I don't even know how you do that. I've read it. It's not compatible with the new covenant, but that's how they want to approach it. They're trying to undermine sound theology. And it sounds pretty good until you read Hebrews 9:1, and then it's all over. So, sorry. I am thankful for one thing. When something like this comes up, it makes me think. It makes me go back and study. Reading back through Exodus really raised a lot of questions in my mind, and not questions about the validity of what was said or what was done, or whether or not that's still Old Covenant or whatever. It's really about it's kind of a complex book, structurally speaking. It reminds me of what, of course, Revelation is incredibly structurally difficult to understand, and Exodus is kind of I was reminded of that. It's like I really need to go back through that and really think about the timeline there. Because I don't think it's quite as straightforward as it is written. I don't think it's quite linear. But then again, that's just my first impression. So, and I wouldn't think to teach on it until I was a little bit more sure about what I thought and what I could prove and what I could disprove. But as far as this video, as far as there being a law part A and a law part B, kind of like epoxy, you mix them together and you come up with something, but you still don't have to go with the part B. No good. Nice try, no cigar. All right, you have any questions or comments? Any intelligent questions or comments? That's one thing I don't like about Matthew Nolan, is he doesn't open up his video for comments. Because, well, that's what people who can't argue their position do. I mean, it's one thing to answer questions in front of a passive crowd that is there because they think you're right. It's another to face open criticism from people who think you're really misguided. All righty. So leave those questions and comments below. Like and subscribe. I appreciate it when you do. Yeah. I'll see you on the next video. Oh, and God bless you too.